Malcolm X once said that a man without a knowledge of himself is like a tree without roots. He can't grow. This afternoon, we're going to kick off our shoes and walk bare feet in the fertile soil from which the roots of our poetry springs. Our guest today is Brother Layding Kaliba. He's the author of several books. He's also a publisher. As I was thinking, I thought about Africa and the importance of names to African peoples. In traditional African society, one chooses a name in the hopes that the person that's being named will personify and exhibit the attributes of that name. Lumumba was killed in the Belgian Congo in the 60s by the CIA. I found it interesting that you would take that name. As I said, Layding Kaliba is a powerful name. And I was just curious as to why you chose that name to edify yourself.
Because I had two births. I was born, of course, in 1947 to my mother and father. Then I was born again in the 60s, in the revolutionary period of the 60s. And so I had to find a name for my new birth, for the new person that I wanted to become. So Layding means aware. Lumumba, of course, as you said, it's named after Patrice Lumumba from the Belgian Congo. Kaliba means warrior-like, because at the time, it was about armed struggle and things like that. So, that was just part of my political orientation. But, you just have to find out who you are and rename yourself. I'm not saying everybody should do that, but for me, that seemed like the road to take, because although my name historically was a relevant one, Frederick Douglass, Bright, so named after the great emancipator, not emancipator, but, abolitionist Frederick Douglass, I still needed to define myself, because to me, someone was giving me that name, someone forced me to have that name almost. So I had to choose a name that was of my own calling.
Okay. In reading your work, one of the things that has touched me greatly is the reverence that you have for your mother. I'm aware of the fact that your mother died when you were 12 years old. My mother lived to be a much older woman, but her death was no less traumatic for me. I'm just curious as to how her death affected you and how you were able to sustain yourself during what must have been a really difficult time.
Yeah, well, my mother was like everything. She's the one that just watched out for me and my two brothers and my sister. She scrubbed other people's floors and things like that, to feed us. And, just incredible the sacrifice she made when we got in trouble in school. She was there crying to the principal to let us back in, and all this stuff. Yeah, so your mother becomes like your personal God almost, Therein lies that poem that we were kicking around at my house, man, about in the absence of God. Okay. So to kind of give it a flow, can I just kick the piece?
Of course, I was about to ask you to do that.
All right. Yeah, as I was saying to Brother Paul, it was that my mother was like everything. She just did everything for us, every sacrifice you can conceive of. Y'all know how mothers are. They look out for you, when nobody else will. When nobody else loves you, they're there for you. So this piece is called In the Absence of God. I was 12 years old when God died. 12 years old when my tears eclipsed the sun, and I was left to grapple with a world too harsh for limited understanding. God was a magic woman, a miracle worker with healing hands, hands that blended bath water into just right, lips that kissed bumps and bruises into feel better. I once believed that God was forever because no one had prepared me for the absence of grace, life outside the shelter of mama's wings. Confusion brought bitterness, but even in my anger, I never forsook my God, never knelt at the altar of rejection or prayed to false idols. Mama, you were the only God I ever knew. So many years have passed since my baptism in your sacred waters. Still, I remain your child, writing poems in the absence of God.
I'm concerned, and most of us who care about our young brothers and sisters are concerned when tragedy befalls them, be it the loss of a brother or a sister, a grandmother. What would you say to a young brother or sister who perhaps has had the experience of that loss and they're trying to make some sense of their lives? I know that you were able to write. I'm assuming you didn't write that poem when she died. I don't really know.
No.
But what can you say to a young brother or sister who's going through that hurt and that pain that will help them to kind of soar and rise above that tragedy?
Well, I think the route that some take is that they take the positive attributes of the person that passed on, and they honor those attributes. You know, if your mother or father was consistently saying be good, you know, go to school and everything, you kind of embrace those ideals that she wanted, you know, you to have, and that gives you the strength. Like when you're getting ready to do something wrong, sometimes, like when I was going to do things wrong, and I did a lot of things wrong. You know, my mother's image would like be popping up in my head. Don't do it. You know, and that would give me the strength, you know, to try to chill out. You know, didn't work all the time, but you know, it helps a lot. So you got to have something to hold on to. So, you know, eventually I started writing, and I started, you know, just like kind of holding on to my own words, you know, and that gave me strength because it clarified a lot of things. That's what writing did for me. It was therapeutic. You know, when I was bugging out, when I was tripping, I started writing things down. You know, why am I tripping? Why, you know, what am I feeling? Then I go back and I read it as if it's not me that wrote it, and then I kind of like, you know, soothe the troubled waters, and I'm able to like stay, you know, on the straight and narrow, so to speak.
In the Absence of God is just one of many poems which kind of moved me. I'd like you to see the book, one of the books that Brother Kaliba has written. This is his most recent book, Spirit Anthems and Ancient Magic. Do you as a poet, and do the poets of your generation feel that we have a legacy that we should celebrate and revere, or do you think we should just forget about what those brothers and sisters wrote during the Harlem Renaissance?
No, of course we have to remember and embrace our history and our past, because if you have no past, you have no future. So, as you were saying, like a lot of the times, you know, our history gets pushed to the side, especially in this society that we're trapped in. That's why we get 1 month to celebrate, you know, African history, and that's ridiculous. You know, every day should be African history. So my suggestion to everybody is like, take your history serious. Understand that your history happens every day. Everything that you do is history. And that's also why I started writing, because I knew there wasn't many people who were going to document my history, my family, what we did, the contributions we made. So what the hell, I said, I'll do it myself, you know, and that's what we have to do. We have to stop waiting for other people to write our history. We have to make our own history and record our own history. And just kind of following up on what you said, this is a piece called Old Josh. Sometimes you get some of your history from the strangest places. Now this guy Josh, I used to run into him on the streets of Harlem. He was like a wino. And you know, he used to always try to talk to me, and then, but one day, you know, he was talking, you know, kind of to me and to himself. So I stopped and listened to him, you know, and he was serious. He had a serious life before he fell on hard times. So this is a piece that kind of reflects my feelings about that meeting with old Josh. Old Josh is a soldier. He stands on the corner of 113th Street. Each night finds him mumbling a wine-stint story about a life warred with time. Josh ain't never been overseas, never fought no battles in jungles of can't-see thickness. But if you're listening carefully, while he weaves his wine reverie about living on the front lines of trying to make it, you realize he's been at war all his life. Fueled by sips of night train, he unloads a cargo full of stories for anyone with a moment's listen and a contribution to the war chest. Stories about 14 and on his own, 3 times married before 25, and children who will never call him daddy. Old Josh is a soldier, hiding in trenches of self-pity and exaggerated yesterdays. He uses the shield of night to camouflage himself from those who would call him derelict, wino, bum. But if you listen, let Josh tell it. He's been fighting all his life, pledging no allegiance, flying no flag. He's just an old man, bored with time, fighting life to the death.
When I read Old Josh, it reminded me of a brother that I ran into the last time I went to your house. I was turning the corner of 137th Street, and it was rather cold, and the wind was kind of beating me up. So I turned the corner, and I heard somebody say, man. And I looked down, and this brother was kind of slunched down on the stoops of this brownstone, and he couldn't get up. And he said, I don't want any money. I don't want any money. He asked me to help him up. So I gave him my hand, and he was smelling of booze, maybe train. And he couldn't stand. He was an old brother. So I picked him up, and at first I was a little bit leery because I didn't know if he had lice or he was dirty or whatever, because he smelled dirty. But I realized that he could be my father. He could be my grandfather. So I thought that it was my duty. I felt that it was my duty to try and help him up and to help him home if I could. It just so happens that he lived on the corner of 137th and 7th Avenue. But as we walked down the street, he started to tell me about his life. And I felt his pain. I felt his struggle. He had no contact with any members of his family. He had come from I think he told me Georgia, Alabama. But I felt sorry for this brother. But I loved him too, because in knowing our struggle and knowing what our people have gone through, it's very difficult for me to metaphorically spit on people that are me. I mean, I know that he's had hard times. So Josh was something that really, really touched me, and I appreciate the fact that you could share that with us. But I have some other questions for you, my brother, before these sisters and brothers have a chance to talk to you. I was listening to some modern day poets. It might have been Jay-Z or some old Biggie. I don't recall exactly, but I'm just listening to Biggie and Master P, and it occurred to me as I listened to them that many of those brothers and sisters, as talented as they are, as gifted as they are, perhaps don't have a reverence and appreciation for their legacy. They don't have an appreciation for those brothers of your generation, those brothers who go back to the Harlem Renaissance, and even further back than that, they go back to the griots of Africa. Oftentimes, when I'm listening to these brothers, and I hear a lot of vulgarity and a lot of vanity, and that's cool, except the B word and hoe has become as commonplace as drinking a Coca-Cola at a basketball game. And that really bothers me. That really disturbs me, because I think we must have an appreciation for who we are, and especially appreciation for our women. So when I hear she ain't nothing but a hoe or that B word, it really kind of bothers me. What can we say to those brothers? I mean, what happened? How can we get them to see the error of their ways? Or what would you say to a brother who thinks that it's cool to say, oh, she's my B, or she ain't nothing but a hoe? It really bothers me, because the people that they are referring to could be my mother, my sister, my grandmother. And I think we have to have reverence for who we are.
Yeah, you heard the old adage, you are what you eat. You also are what you say, So, I mean, I kind of just look at it. It's not that simplistic, but, I kind of understand what they're doing, because they don't have the same connotations that we have when we hear it, To them, it's generic, It's like, bitch to me, excuse me for saying it, but, I mean, I don't like to say, that word or anything. Might will say the word, It's like, to them, it doesn't have the effect that it has on our generation, because it meant someone back in our day when they used that word, that was fighting if you call somebody's woman or sister that word, So it's like, today it's commercial almost. If you don't say it, you ain't getting no contract with nobody to record, If you don't, like come down on our people and ourselves. You know, nobody wants to hear you. But that's the game that other people in this society are playing with us. They want us to denigrate ourselves. They want us to look at ourselves as bitches and hoes, you know, because that way they know they never have to deal with us. So once we elevate ourselves from the mud, then they have to deal with us differently.
Dude, Mr. Kaliba is going to share a selection of his own choosing.
Okay, what I'm gonna do is share 4 poems that I really wanted to share with you guys. Going back to the mother theme, I used to always kind of watch my mother when she was going through her struggles, you know, and I always wondered why she never took the time to do things for herself, you know, put on a pretty dress and go out and party or do something like that. I mean, once in a blue moon she did it, but, you know, it just seemed like she would just sit around and her whole life revolved around keeping us alive. You know, this is called living within her means. Mama used to live within her means. Incense, basic foods, and toiletries made up her shopping list. As tears poured from sorrowed eyes that should have ran dry a long time ago. Incense for the nose, food for the belly, and toiletries to wipe away all traces of anything that spoke of waste. Mama died living within her means. I used to spend long sleepless nights wondering why Mama, just for one day out of her too short life, didn't dare step beyond the limits of her means, and why Daddy wouldn't get up off the boogie, just one finger popping weekend night, so that Mama could smile, even if it didn't last but for a flicker. Incense, basic foods, and toiletry, something for the nose, something for the belly, and something to wipe away anything that spoke of waste. This next piece is called Laura. One thing I noticed when I was growing up was that the guys that I hung with always got in trouble. We was always doing something wrong. But the girls, for the most part, they was cool. You know, they didn't really get in a whole lot of trouble. The only time they got in trouble is when they was following behind some knucklehead boys. So this piece is called Laura. Graveyards are like multiplex movie houses. Each headstone tells another story. Each visitor's eyes become inverted projectors, flashing giant images on the walls of memory. The wind whistles an eerie soundtrack to a story told by life. I come to visit Laura every weekend, come to mourn a movie that will have no sequel. Little Laura was my leading lady, star of my early childhood. Harlem was the stage on which we acted out, hard-headed youth destined to go the way of soft behinds. We were like Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, road buddies. But somewhere on the road to growing up, little Laura got lost. Somewhere between her parents' Scarsdale aspirations and bruises inflicted on her by jagged-edged streets, she lost her way, slipped into the head of a needle, injected herself into a horror feature, a misdirected attempt at high life. Living on the short side of stature, she wore spiked heel shoes to elevate herself above sinking. Makeup hid Laura behind a wall of cosmetic adulthood. Where does a little girl go when her life becomes a B-movie destined to flop? She reached out to me, but I had just fought 15 rounds with the mean streets and lost every one. I'm sorry, Laura. Didn't see you make the wrong turn. I too was lost. Now it takes all my strength just to wipe my eyes and go to visit Laura on the weekend. This next piece is called Baby Grand. When I was talking to you guys earlier, I was telling you about how we have to document our own history because nobody else is going to write it for us. This piece is a little piece of my parents' history. When we were kids, they used to sit us around in the living room and they used to tell us about where they used to party at. And some of the spots they used to party in were Small's Paradise, the Rennie, Cotton Club, Mittens, and a spot called the Baby Grand. One night in the 70s, I had gone by the Baby Grand. They used to have like poetry readings in this small back room in the back. And it just dawned on me that this was the same place that my parents told me about. It seemed strange standing there in the place my parents spoke so fondly of. You know, when I close my eyes and I listen with my mind's ear, I can see them dancing and hear them laughing, their voices rising and falling sharply in tones of now ancient hipness. Standing there at the club Baby Grand, I can recall those intimate nights of mommy and daddy, rapping with me, my brothers and my sister, about how they rode the original A train to Harlem, how they stomped at the Savoy and had big times at Smalls, how they Lindy hopped and soft-shoed their way into weekend frenzies, Cab Calloway, zoot suits, bebop, red dresses and high-heel sneakers, mama and daddy losing themselves in the soul of a Dinah Washington blues song. The Brown Bomber would win another fight, and it was big times in parties under Harlem lights. You know, when I stand there and I close my eyes, I can see them dancing the way they would dance for us in our Harlem apartment. The living room floor, it would transform into their ballroom, and mommy and daddy would bounce to their feet, forcing their bodies to recall youthful movements. Or I can see it so clearly now. My mama, she's up on the floor, and she's swinging and swaying like Langston Hughes' poet words. And daddy, he picks up the beat. He steps back, spins around, pulls a split, slides up in time to catch mama's hand at the high point of a spin. And now me, my brothers, and my sister, we're on the edge of the couch. We're caught up on our parents' every move. Moves that do justice to ancient tribal dances, dances that our people danced long before ocean and time put Harlem on our minds. Then as quickly as the images came, they seemed to be fading in the distance, and I can hear my mother's voice saying, "All right, kids, brush your teeth before you go to bed." And I could see my older sister walking toward the TV set, getting ready to catch the end of the Late Late Show. And mommy and daddy, they're walking hand in hand to the bedroom with Baby Grand yesterday still glowing in their eyes. You know, when I stand there and I listen with my mind's ear, I can hear the music. I don't stay out late, nowhere to go. I'm home about 8, just me and my radio. Ain't misbehaving, I'm saving my love for you. When I close my eyes, I can see them dancing. Thank you. This last piece that I'm going to share right now is called Pedro. Now, everybody's heard about Columbus, right? Do you know who Pedro Alonso Nino was? Well, Pedro was the navigator who actually found the Americas. He was an African, and the Africans had made the journey to the so-called New World many years before Columbus even thought about, finding a shortcut to India. So one day I was doing a reading in this classroom, and I was sitting in the back of the room, and prior to my reading, they were discussing history and Columbus's contribution or lack of thereof, to this new world. And I just started writing down this piece called Pedro. If I can remember it. It wasn't your fault, Pedro. Pedro Alonso Nino. Your African eyes could not have foreseen the vicious aftermath of discovery, the tragedy your navigational skills would impose upon your red and black brothers. You couldn't have known that in 1492, when you piloted the flagship Nino off the coast of the Cape Verde Islands, the eyes of history would cry for 500 years, burning from the venomous horror of Columbus's deceit. Say you didn't know. Let your voice pierce the solacing wall time has built. Say that you didn't know the demonic nature of Captain Columbus, that you weren't a willing conspirator in one of European history's greatest deceptions. Say you didn't know. Say that you weren't down with it. Say that you weren't down with the murderous madness that followed, the slaughter of your brothers, the rapes of your mothers and daughters. Tell me that you weren't the America's first, Uncle Tom. Columbus threatened your life, didn't he, Pedro? He told you he'd burn you at the stake if you didn't lie to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, if you didn't swear that he had found a shortcut to India. He held a knife to your throat, didn't he? Yeah, that's it. He held a knife to your throat. He drew blood, didn't he, Pedro? Tell me that he drew blood before you agreed to make history cry, before the first of your red brothers died, before the first kidnapping took place. Tell me you stood up to him, Pedro. Tell me you stared him straight in the face. That's the way it happened, didn't it? Didn't it? You threatened to burn the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria to ashes. Tell me before decades have another miscarriage of truth and another century passes. Pedro, tell me that you never made it back to Spain, that you died fighting alongside your red and black brothers. Tell me you chose honor over fear, death over treachery, truth over the lie. Pedro, tell me you chose truth over the lie. Thank you.
Many years ago, two of our most learned scholars had a raging debate about whether art had any relevance or whether art should be used for certain purposes. I'm thinking of W.B. Du Bois and Anna Bontemps. Du Bois said art should be used for political purposes. It should be used for propaganda. It should be used like a baseball bat to hit people over their heads. You know, art has a function, it has a purpose, excuse me. And one of the things that strikes me about Brother Layding's work is that it's political. It hits you in the head. It gives you something that you can think about. At the beginning of this conversation, I said that we were going to kick off our shoes and walk bare feet on the fertile ground and look at and feel the earth from which the roots of our poetry sprang. We've tried to do that this afternoon. We've tried to do that in a very humble and a very real way, because it isn't about us, but it's about you. It's about you taking the torch and doing what you have to do for yourselves, for your people, and for the cause of truth. So as we remind ourselves and celebrate what Brother Layding has done, I'd like to make these books available to you, Spirit Anthems and Ancient Magic. I would also like to give you the opportunity to read The Moon is My Witness,